Sat down to watch this episode of the Jimmy Dore Show.
They used helicopters and chemical agents, immigration agents.
The opening premise? A huge ICE operation in Chicago where hundreds of agents stormed a building. Then things start drifting. He claims Amy Goodman was called a terrorist for covering a protest.
Okay, so they called Amy Goodman a terrorist when she was protesting a pipeline.
What I found? Goodman was charged with trespassing at the Dakota Access Pipeline protest. The charges were tossed, and nobody credible ever labeled her a terrorist. Then Jill Stein supposedly got the same treatment.
They call Jill Stein a terrorist. They'll call anybody a terrorist.
Again, no. She was charged with vandalism for spray painting construction equipment, but I couldn't find any record of her being called a terrorist. Not by law enforcement, not by the media, no one. From there, we get the claim that 300 ICE agents raided the building in full combat gear using chemical agents, and that the Associated Press reported it.
So here it is from the AP. They used helicopters and chemical agents, immigration agents.
The AP did report on a raid, and yes, it mentioned helicopters and chemical agents, so that one's surprisingly solid. And yes, ICE does use camo gear, even if camouflage on a Chicago street is mostly for style points. He adds that the Chicago Police Department refused to intervene with federal agents.
The ground here in the city in Illinois is that the politicians, as much as they want to declare lawfare, they really don't have anything to really oppose ICE, including when the CPD superintendent says, yeah, we're not going to intervene with the FBI or ICE or any other federal agents.
That's true. CPD publicly said they wouldn't obstruct ICE or FBI operations, bureaucratic neutrality, Chicago style. Then he says the city is $1.1 billion in the hole. That's not exaggeration. Chicago's deficit has hovered around that mark. So again, accurate, though depressingly so. Next up, the more cinematic parts. Agents storming a building by helicopter as families slept, chemical agents near a public school, and a city council member being handcuffed.
Using helicopters and chemical agents. Yep. And chemical agent, I had one of those in the 90s because he was completely toxic. I'll tell you that. But anyway, that's another story. Storming an apartment complex by helicopters as families slept, deploying chemical agents near a public school, handcuffing a Chicago city council member at a hospital. Activists, residents, and leaders say increasingly combative tactics used by federal immigration.
There's solid reporting on helicopters and arrests, but no verified evidence of chemical agents near a school or a detained council member. That section seems inflated, some truth, but plenty of smoke. The show also insists that Mayor Brandon Johnson declared certain areas off-limits to ICE.
Brandon Johnson is declaring that some parts of the city will be off-limits. Good luck enforcing.
I found no record of that statement. The city reaffirmed its sanctuary policy, sure, but no-go zones for ICE. There's a stretch where Pritzker allegedly said ICE used tear gas and smoke grenades, making it look like a war zone.
Pritzker says. He says they are the ones that are making it a war zone. They fire tear gas and smoke grenades, and they make it look like it's a war zone.
That one's tricky. He did criticize ICE tactics and call for investigations, but I couldn't find a quote about tear gas specifically. So, half right. He then claims over 1,000 immigrants were arrested in the Chicago area the previous month, and that the Trump administration was sending in the National Guard.
More than 1,000 immigrants have been arrested since an immigration crackdown started last month in the Chicago area. The Trump administration has also vowed to deploy National Guard troops in its agenda to boost deportation.
I found evidence of a crackdown, but no National Guard deployment. So, partial truth? Big operation, yes. Military backup? No. Then comes the most emotional claim, that U.S. citizens, legal immigrants, and children were zip-tied and detained.
But U.S. citizens, immigrants with legal status, and children have been among those detained in increasingly brazen and aggressive encounters which pop up daily across the neighborhoods in the city of 2.7 million and its many suburbs.
Actually true. Multiple reports, including first-hand accounts, confirm that some detainees were citizens and legal residents. Children, too. Pritzker really did call for an investigation into that.
Recently, in an operation that's raised calls for investigation by Pritzker. So While federal agents have mostly focused on immigrant-heavy and Latino enclaves,
Confirmed, he directed state agencies to look into how ICE handled the raid. They say the raid focused mostly on Latino enclaves and then hit South Shore, a largely black neighborhood.
the operation early Tuesday, so I guess it was Tuesday, unfolded in the largely black South Shore neighborhood that had a small influx of migrants resettled in Chicago while seeking.
That aligns with DHS statements and witness reports. South Shore did see a smaller influx of Venezuelan asylum seekers. Now the show claims News Nation was invited to film the raid.
News Nation, which was invited to observe the operation, reported agents repelled from Black Hawk helicopters.
True again. News Nation had access to footage of the operation. It describes residents being zip-tied and woken up door to door.
Agents then went door to door, woke up residents, and used zip ties to restrain them. Wow.
Confirmed by eyewitnesses and local coverage. Then we drift back into politics. The show says 2 Chicago districts turned red in the last election.
2 districts in this city turned red, which is a miracle in its own right. My family's been living here for generations.
That's false. Chicago hasn't flipped any council or congressional districts Republican. The city remains very blue. Later, Pritzker supposedly threatened to sue Trump over ICE raids.
And then you have Governor J.B. Pritzker threatening to sue Trump. All in the while, this is still happening.
No record of that. He condemned the raids but didn't file or announce a lawsuit. The claim of a recent Walmart raid, covered by Benny Johnson and Kristi Noem.
And Benny Johnson was covering it with Kristi Noem here in my city. So these things are happening, and it's a show of force.
No evidence. Nothing in news archives or statements from ICE or Walmart. He also says there was a No Kings March protest planned for October 18th.
Time soon, because on October 18th, there's going to be a No Kings March protest or parade, however which way you want to call it.
Except for
That protest doesn't appear anywhere in event databases or local coverage. Maybe wishful thinking. Then there's a witness describing hundreds of agents outside and children being dragged out unclothed into vans.
Ebony Sweets Watson, who lives across the street, said it looked like hundreds of agents were outside her front door. Watson said she saw agents dragging residents, including kids, out of the building without any clothes on and into U-Haul vans. Kids were separated from their mothers, she said.
Hundreds? Unlikely. ICE confirmed about 37 arrests total. As for unclothed kids, I couldn't find a single verifiable report. He moves on to say the building was unfit for habitation, full of clucks, owned by a bank and taken over by Venezuelans.
It was just a couple of black folks in a building that nobody was supposed to be in.
That nobody was, but what does that mean? Nobody was supposed to be in that building.
Well, the building's operational, but technically it's not suitable for human habitation. And not to mention, there could be citations against the landlord. There could be other code violations.
Okay, let's listen to the rest of what this guy has to say.
Body. Also, that's a building full of clucks. You do know what clucks is, right? Also,
A Cluck is a drug addict who doesn't have the money to support his habit. A Cluck will often try to scrounge drugs or small amounts of money to buy drugs from anyone they know. And when they engage in this behavior that resembles chickens that cluck, peck, and scratch for any morsel of food they can find.
There's truth that the property had code violations and many Venezuelan tenants, but no record that it was bank-owned or full of drug addicts. That part sounds more like neighborhood gossip than evidence. Then comes activist Jamal Green's segment, where he talks about politicians dumping the migrant crisis into black neighborhoods. That part, believe it or not, is rooted in fact. Chicago did repurpose closed public schools in those areas for migrant shelters, and the criticism has been ongoing. But the $700 million Florida contract he mentions?
Shelters, and then they gave over $700 million to a company out in Florida to manage those shelters. They took the buildings that you've been asking for to be developed and built.
I couldn't find any trace of that. Spending was high, but nowhere near that amount, and not to a Florida company. And finally, because apparently we couldn't end quietly, Putin and Xi allegedly discussed immortality through organ transplants.
Hey, check out the story we covered about Putin and Xi discussing immortality through repeated organ transplants. Click the video on screen.
Let's just say my searches turned up nothing but memes. No evidence, no transcripts, no reality. So, stepping back, the episode was a strange cocktail. Half solid investigative work, half unverified theater. It got the broad strokes right. There was a raid, There were helicopters, there was outrage, but it layered those truths with claims that don't have roots in any document or database I can find. Still, I'll give credit where it's due. The show captured a real tension in Chicago, how federal enforcement collides with local politics and struggling neighborhoods. It's worth watching as long as you keep a browser tab open beside it. Reality's still there. Sometimes you just have to dig it out from under the fireworks.